What's up, Ryan? How's it going?
Good. How you doing, Joe?
It's fantastic. Just kicking it at home right now. So stoked to have you on the podcast. For people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah. So my name is Ryan Dolley. I'm one of the SuperDataBros. I have a podcast and a blog and YouTube channel with my brother Eric, and we are actual brothers. We get asked that all the time. Are you guys real brothers? And the answer is yes. And then otherwise, I'm a analytics consultant. I do strategic consulting. I do still do some kind of hands to keyboard work, technical work, and then I also help advise analytics vendors sometimes on market strategies and that sort of
Hmm.
thing.
Interesting. Yeah, I hung out with you and your brother down at Day to Day Texas earlier this year in Austin. You guys are quite the duo. So
Yeah, thanks. That's an awesome. That was my first time at Day to Day, and I thought that conference had an awesome vibe, and just everything about it was different from most other data conferences I've been to in a good way.
hmm completely agree. I think Lynn Bender, the guy who puts it together, I think he described it as a party that masquerades as a conference.
Yeah,
So I think it's a very apt description of it. So
yeah,
um,
that was my experience.
yeah, but you guys are definitely a hit. I think everyone was definitely recognized that the Dolly brothers walking around the conference center. So you guys have definitely started making a name for yourself. Plus, you have the cool T-shirts, the Super Data Bros. So who could not like you guys, right? So
Right.
that's cool. Yeah, and I think you've had some things in your mind recently you want to talk about with respect to BI.
Yeah, well, I've just been, I've been thinking a lot about the last, what you might call well, there was this metaphor, say, that people used for analytics for a long time, which was all about like a supply chain, right? You conceive of your analytics as a supply chain, and I started kind of thinking about that, and while I think that was an accurate way to describe what we were doing for a long time, at least from the way that manifested itself from kind of a business intelligence or front end perspective was it made everything about how efficiently can we prep data and get it into a state where we can just churn out visualizations and dashboards, right?
Mm,
And I think that was valuable. It was necessary thinking about the history of BI and where we were coming from. But I really have this feeling that going into now that we're well and truly into the 2020s, that we're going to have to change the way the front end works and the purpose of it in order to really continue to see value on investments in business intelligence in general.
interesting. Walk me through that. Like, what needs to change and why?
Well, I mean, the big thing, because I thought a lot about this, and like the big thing that needs to change in my mind, one of them is that this supply chain mentality turns everything into it's all about efficiency in one direction, right?
Mm,
How quickly can we prep and pump data into the front end? And that's great. But the problem with that is that we've created an analytics front end and a business intelligence layer that is very messy. It's very hard to govern, and this is to me the most important part. It has a kind of insight lock-in in the
mm,
BI layer, right? Because we've optimized for this one-way flow. But in reality, what happens a lot of times, especially if you're trying to build out kind of a self-service visualization data discovery part of your data practice, is that people they realize something important in the BI front end, and then it's just stuck there. It's abandoned there forever because we haven't built up kind of a bi-directional flow that takes things into the front end, but also easily lets you take them out.
interesting. That is a big change. So
Right, right.
yeah, yeah. It feels like with BI, it's always been, I think, as you say, sort of a one way thing. Analysts and BI report creators were just making the report. Yeah. I mean, you and I have done this for a while, making the report, changing the report, but it always felt like a very passive exercise.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and that's I mean it really my theory on it anyways. And I'm curious, if you kind of how you feel about this, but it actually kind of comes back to you made a post on LinkedIn, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, maybe that kind of blew up a little bit about like, what was the point of the last 10 years of analytics,
Yeah.
And
It began a bit curmudgeon-y once in a while. So
yeah, yeah. But I read that and I was like, I mean, you really had a point there. Like there was a long time when I was thinking about my experience that it was kind of like the BI piece of it felt like it was like, and then we'll build some dashboards, right? Like that
right.
wasn't the sexy part of it. And I don't know that it needs to be the sexy part of it, but it needs to be better integrated into the way you think about your data practice, and not just as an endpoint or something you do because you at some point you got to make a chart in order to communicate the more interesting data engineering work that you're doing, right? And I think that there's just a lot of stuff that happens on that front end that you would want to be able to bring back down easily, right? To move it upstream easily. The example I give is like, if someone were to do using a BI tool or even Excel, and this is not an unusual thing for them to do, let's say they were going to be looking at the information and they do some analysis and they come up with a new way to bucketize your customers visiting your online storefront, right? And now you say to yourself, like, what should you do with that? Is it okay to just have it live in a chart? Or would it be better if there were an easy way for you to then take that and plug it into an ML model to do real-time offers to people visiting the store, right? Like that piece of it in my mind today is way too hard.
Yeah, I agree. It's something in the last chapter of our book we wrote about this sort of the future of data engineering and serving data, and it feels like machine learning is definitely going to become more, I think, front and center. Same with streaming to some extent. I think the feedback loop between basically when data is generated and you're doing something with it, that's going to just shrink incredibly. So the notion of dashboards, for example, right? Like I write that might evolve towards something that's more akin to operational analytics in some
Mm-hmm.
ways. Because especially with real time, for example, right? As data gets faster, looking at a dashboard that tells you kind of like what happened or when it happened, I think is a bit useless because you want to take action on that. Like you just don't want to sit there and stare at a dashboard that
Yeah.
continuously updates. Like what's the point of that? So
Yes.
it's just a lot of things I think that are causing sort of a rethink of BI. Like you had a series of articles about sort of how BI needs to evolve, and I think it's awesome that we're all having these different conversations about how it needs to evolve because I get this sense that it up to this point, it feels very ceremonial, where you're just making the dashboard and then adding the charts, and here you go. And then how many people read these dashboards? I have no idea. What do they do with these dashboards? No idea. But we're making dashboards, so
Right. Right. And you're, I mean, it's funny. Yeah. That's a good way to describe it. And it's almost like, if you think about the dashboard itself, there is in my mind, or will be going forward, still a strong use case for a dashboard, but it is not as the catch-all default data presentation style, right? It is when you have known questions with easily definable answers
yeah,
that everyone agrees on that have an ongoing operational component, right? Then it makes sense to have like, we'll take these 10 metrics, we're going to put them on one page. We're all going to look at it so that we're all speaking the same language. We all have the same touch points. And the important component of it in my mind is like, we also all agree on what the numbers mean and what we're going to do about them, right? Because the challenge with the dashboard is if you don't agree about what they mean or you don't have any idea what to do about them, you immediately get yourself into a situation where the dashboard is no longer useful.
right.
And then you start thinking about what alternative forms of okay, so then what should we do instead? And I think there's some interesting work being done around that. Around I've been very interested to see kind of the evolving BI notebook space
Mm.
as kind of a way to tell stories better, in a way that it's very challenging in a dashboard. And I think this is one area where we're just going to have to. There's kind of this collision between this feeling, and I agree with it, that we need something that moves beyond dashboards, and what is that? And then there's also kind of the whole generative AI GPT thing flowing into it, where you say, well, how much of what we shove into a dashboard today would be better handled by some sort of model or chatbot that can answer questions on the fly.
Yeah, it feels like it's going that direction. I mean, ThoughtSpot had their, I think they announced like some sort of a GPT integration, and
Yeah.
I mean, I remember even back in like 2016 or 17, like somebody wanted me to make a like an Alexa bot that you could ask it questions and it would get the data out of Looker and give you the results back. So it feels like people have always wanted these different ways of interfacing with the data. I felt like the Alexa was a bit at the time it was a bit challenging to make something that parse intelligently.
Yeah.
But I think with GPT it might be finally there, because it's how people ask questions. It's not like they ask questions. People don't think in SQL. I think that's like the one thing I'd like to get across to data professionals. Like, people always. I don't know. I guess see people wearing like SQL T-shirts and stuff, which is super cool. But the rest of the world doesn't think in terms of SQL at all. It's a very abstract thing. So
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see that insofar as like, my dad worked in. He's retired now, but he worked in kind of IT and analytics starting in the early '90s, and he was telling me that there was a time when I was 8 or whatever, where the theory was that like SQL was so easy that it so closely mimicked real human language that like just everybody in business would learn SQL. Like that was the assumption. And here we are 35 years later, and it has not and will not happen, right? Honestly, before I saw GPT, before I started playing around with ChatGPT, the reality is over the last I don't know, starting in 2015, 2016, every BI tool implemented some form of natural language query within the tool, and they universally sucked. They just, they in tight conditions, they were a great sales demo.
right.
But when you use them in the real world, they just were no good. And so before October or whenever it was that GPT first kind of hit everyone's consciousness, I would have told you that this chatbot BI idea is still way far in the future. I don't feel that way anymore.
No, I don't either. I use GPT and Bard every day, just to kind of probe like what it knows and see what it comes back with. But it does a frighteningly great job at giving pretty mediocre to decent answers.
Right.
And that's kind of all you need. So, I was reading the other day, like, Bloomberg, there's Bloomberg GPT, they're training that on all their data sets. And, so I mean, you could effectively do a lot of the work of a financial analyst, once this thing is trained up, and that's interesting. So,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I did just last night. I asked it to. I was doing some analysis of my my taxes, right, and asking it to project forward different things about my income and feeding in parameters, is how many kids I have, and like it was like I was talking to a financial advisor.
interesting.
Yeah. It's wild. And so I think that will definitely have a place. And you mentioned ThoughtSpot's integration of that. I went to the Gartner conference in Orlando a couple of weeks ago, and I did. Turns out someone at ThoughtSpot is a fan of the Super Data show.
How could they not? Especially when you wear that suit to the
Exactly.
Gartner. So.
Right?
You're wearing like a gray suit or something. I was like, he's cool. He's cool.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's funny. I think sometimes I'm the only person who in the tech space who wishes we would dress up more. Because I don't know. I have a collection of like what I think are very cool ties, and I just don't have anywhere to wear them anymore. But they gave me a demo of the way they've integrated GPT into ThoughtSpot, and I thought it was very smart insofar as they layered it on. They had a keyword based kind of chat engine, right, where you would. It had type ahead, but like it would ingest it had the metadata. And so as you typed, it would map what you were typing to the metadata that they already had. And so what they just kind of layered GPT on top of that, which I thought was smart because, they've optimized this kind of keyword-based SQL generation engine. And if anybody who's played around with GPT has seen the SQL it generates, it is all over the place as far as how good it is.
Right.
And so they layered it on top of what they already had to keep lineage and explainability and the high quality SQL engine in place, but to give the user the freedom to really type anything. So I thought it was a very smart integration. And they were the one in particular I was curious what they were going to do, because unlike most other BI tools, their whole thing was, look, you can chat to our tool.
Right. Always has been. But you had to do it like a certain way before, right? So it was like a very specific pattern match. And so, but now with freeform text, like that's, I think it's gonna be a game changer. I know all this stuff is super early, and I think there's high expectations, but give it time. I mean,
exactly.
Like I've told other people, ChatGPT and similar stuff. It just reminds me of what the web browser was back in '95 when it came out, or but it's super early. But I think it opens your eyes to what's possible, right? And so it's not like we're going to stop training AI models despite certain petitions out there. So it's like it's going to happen.
No. Right, it is, and I agree. I mean, sometimes people. The one thing I will say is like, I'm very impressed with what I've seen of it so far. If you were to ask me to predict what impact is this going to have on kind of BI and the analytics front end, there's some obvious things to say, like it's going to cut down on the amount of manual dashboard creation or manual construction of visualizations that we're going to do. We're going to engage in. It's going to make data discovery more fluid and easier for people. You're not going to have to learn as complicated of a user interface, but that's about as far as I'm willing. Like, those things are obvious to me. And otherwise, I feel like the generative AI thing is almost a wall beyond which I'm skeptical of anyone who is confident they can see past,
Yeah.
It's just unknowable to me right now.
Well, I mean, for the first time, you've really captured some semblance of intelligence, right? In a way where you could do basically a back and forth Q&A type thing with it, right? Or some sort of a statement of response, but in a way I would say that passes a Turing test, to a large degree. I mean, the whole point of GPT was to make a very believable looking text prediction model, and it certainly did a fantastic job at that. Whether or not it's right, who cares about facts these days anyway? So that's quaint. But as long as it looks true, that's what matters.
That's all that matters, and it's very convincing. I've never seen such a convincingly wrong computer system.
Mm-hmm. It gaslights you to no end, because you're just like, is it right? And you're like, no, it's not. But is it? I don't know.
I had it write a. I asked it to write it. I have 3 kids. I asked it to write an epic poem about them fighting a dragon, so I could read it to them. Right, and it did a good job. And then I was actually an English major and a playwriting student in undergraduate, so I asked it to convert the poem to iambic pentameter, which is the meter that Shakespeare wrote in, right? And it would continuously fail to do it, but claim that it had done it. And it would try to prove to me that what it had written was in iambic pentameter. And then I would point out that it was wrong, and it would apologize profusely and then say, I'm going to rewrite it now in the correct meter and write it wrong again. And I could not convince it. It was just this interplay where it kept saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I messed up. Let me fix it. And then it would get it wrong. But every time I asked it, is this an iambic pentameter? It would initially tell me, yes, it is. and it would try to prove to me that it was until I pointed out the way in which it was wrong. It was wild.
That's interesting. I'll show you this real quick. Similar thing. So I asked, let me pull this up here real quick. And for the audience, sorry, this is audio only, but so I asked Bard, was the war in Iraq a failure? Just to see if it had an opinion on stuff. And it certainly did.
Yeah.
It says the war in Iraq was a failure. And I actually had a follow-up. Is this statement false? Which was more of a logic question, sort of a self-referential type of a question. And then it proceeded to also respond, no, the war in Iraq was in fact a failure. The statement is not wrong, or it's not false. So I thought that was really interesting because it definitely had an opinion about something, and I'm not sure where this opinion came from, but
Yeah.
but it did a good job at arguing, like, yes, it was an absolute failure. Here's why, blah 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 blah. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, and I think about like, so how I try to think about like, so let's transpose something like what you just showed there. Like the system has an opinion, right? So it's, it is an expert system insofar as like you're asking it to, you're asking it a question like an opinion question, and it is trying to summarize what it believes to be the state of the facts and give you something. And so I'm very interested in if we turn this to internal data at a business, right? And now the system has an opinion about how you should be running your business.
Yeah.
What does that do to the workplace, and what happens if you disagree with the large language model about what you should be doing in your business?
That's interesting. Yeah. What if it tells you that you actually need to close shop? This is a waste of your time.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
or Barbara needs to be fired. So
Right. Exactly.
not pulling her weight. That's a fascinating thing. Yeah. Who are you going to believe? Right. And
Right.
And could it be manipulated too? Depending on somebody's agenda. Yeah, I mean, these are fascinating questions that I think we're going to be experiencing in no less, or probably no more than a year from now, when you start being able to train the kind of foundation models on your own data. That's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I think everybody. I mean, you kind of said earlier, right? We're not going to stop training these models. I mean, it doesn't feel. Everybody's going to do it, right? And we're going to do it before we have figured all this out. And so, what I don't know when the C-suite has got what the model's telling it, and then what everybody who work for them are saying, right? And those things disagree. What happens? We're all going to learn.
Well, yeah, especially if you are a malicious actor and decided to maybe taint a model that's used by a competing company.
Right.
I guarantee you something that's going to be happening. Just misinformation, disinformation, kind of polluting the model that's giving you lots of advice. If I were a malicious actor, I would certainly do that to my competitors.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just that's going to be fascinating to see. What do you think happens to analysts with the rise of generative AI?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. What do you think happens to analysts with the rise of generative AI?
One more time. It cuts off exactly when you get to the...
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry. My question was, what happens to analysts?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, with generative AI.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier, there's... so the caveat with this will be, I mentioned the wall, beyond which it's hard to see, right? But I think... so one thing about the state of generative AI is that I have asked it, when I first played around with it, my immediate thought, because part of my job and yours too, right? We produce content, and when I saw what it could do, my first thought was like I was a little afraid when I saw how good it was at writing something. But when I started asking it questions about my area of expertise in analytics and BI, I realized that at least at the state that it's in today, in order to get anything that approaches what I as kind of an expert in the field felt was insightful out of it, like you actually had to already be an expert in the field, right? To put in the right prompts is kind of what it seemed like to me, right? If I didn't know enough about this industry, I wouldn't have been able to ask it the questions to get the answers that I got out of it. And so I think in the near term, it will be a significant productivity enhancement for data analysts who already possess a level of expertise, right? Because you will be able to input the right prompts. You will be able to input prompts to the system that people without your expertise would not. And so that's the short term. Now, in the longer term, I think eventually the system itself, it's hard to see, and unless there is some unforeseen technical barrier in which it turns out that the current methods of building these AIs, unless we're close to a wall where they can't get much smarter using the current methods, which I am not in a position to say whether that's true or not. It's not my area of expertise, right? But unless that's the case, it's hard for me not to see a world where they truly do replace a lot of what many data analysts do today. If you're on a BI team, or you're a data analyst embedded in a business, or you're a data analyst on a data science team, wherever you are, and most of your job is fielding what I call low value ad hoc questions, which are show me this data. It's currently sliced by dimension X. Now slice it by dimension Y,
Right.
which is a lot of what people do day to day. I mean, there's no way that these systems are not going to fully replace that kind of work, right? And so you need to find this is my career. We're shifting into career advice mode, I guess. What you need to do is find out how to. That stuff's going to get automated one way or another. You need to be moving into, as an individual and as a data practice, high value ad hoc questions that are speculative, where it's not just a matter of reconfiguring the existing data,
Yeah.
but it's a matter of solving problems that come out of the business. And so if anything, it's just, there's the whole show me the money thing we've got going on right now in analytics and data and tied to business value. It's an extension of that. But I mean, I guess it's a long answer to your question, but really, it's going to fundamentally change what it means to be a data analyst. And a lot of what many data analysts do today is there's just no way it's not going to be automated away by the system.
Right. Yeah. I feel like questions that relate to like what and when, right? Like that's subject to automation, forces you to kind of move up the value chain to more causal type problems, right? Kind of how and why type of questions and answers that aren't immediately intuitive, probably by a system, right? It just wouldn't understand how to solve that. It could give you a very convincing answer, but it wouldn't really drive your business, at least not yet. So, that's it's the kind of stuff that the C-suite is expecting, right? I mean, it's the kind of questions they're grappling with every day. So hopefully, it moves analysts closer to helping with, just higher order type problems. So,
my hope is that what this does is so the fear is obviously by automating so much of what data analysts do today that it's going to eliminate the need for them. And it's just, there'll be fewer jobs and the wages will be lower and all of that. And that is possible, but my hope is that what it does is it frees people up that we're able to address important, speculative, high impact questions. We're able to address more of them more quickly using human beings.
right.
That we'll just be able to take this brain power that's currently being wasted on, I'd really like to see this chart by region instead of by state.
Right.
And like, we'll be able to take that person and repurpose their brain power to the type of thing a machine can't do yet.
So if you're somebody who's still in school and is interested in getting into data analytics or data science, what would you recommend to them now?
Yeah. I mean, so this is also something I've thought about, because like, I wonder. So I was talking about, my interactions with with GPT-4 in particular, and how I felt that like I needed this level of expertise in order to be able to input the prompts to get me like high value, meaningful answers out of it. And so one of the things, and I probably don't need to tell anyone who's in school this, right? But I would be engaging with these models now and learning how they work and how they think, in quotes, now, right? Because they are going to be a big part of your job. I don't think that they're going to replace in the near or medium term the fundamental expertise that you need to develop in our industry, because of the fact that you do need to have that level of expertise to input the meaningful prompts. And also, you've probably messed around with it to generate code. I have too. It's impressive, but it also is, the code doesn't always work.
Right.
And even when it does, it's often highly inefficient and may have huge security holes in it and all sorts of stuff like that. So you're still going to need to learn those skills. But I do think your job is going to be highly augmented by these machine intelligences going forward. I think it is going to be more important to understand business and business people and their objectives, and analytics, the philosophy behind it, the practice behind it, the best practices, the high level stuff, right? And be able to marry those together. How do you talk to someone in a business? How do you, when they can't translate what they need to text speak. So how do you do that, right? Those sorts of skills I think are going to be more important. And I do think the thing that's going to get hit first, in my opinion, is probably the just raw, are you an incredible, like just how good are you at, messing around in DBT? You're still going to have to be good, but the premium is going to be shifting towards your ability to identify and deliver value added things to the business, and shifting away from, how good are you at locking yourself away and coming up with a data pipeline. That's my theory.
I tend to agree with that. I mean, I had that rant the other day about how, we need to stop using the word data when we're talking to the business and just, relate to their problems and, help them find solutions, using data as a facilitator of solving these things. But I think we take too much of a data-centric approach to the world. It's sort of, like the the universe revolves around data. Then you suddenly realize that no, actually, it's sort of a Copernicus moment in some ways. But this has been happening. Yeah. But these sorts of moments have been kind of happening on and off in the industry for a long time. I think it's like a pendulum. You sort of swing one way, then the other way. You're like, well, maybe we've been kind of doing it wrong. And these arguments tend to recycle themselves. But I do agree that anymore, with data just becoming a lot easier and automated, like you're going to have to, focus on the business. Some recommendations I would have for listeners is, understand like value stream mapping. That's awesome. Just, understand how to identify and, deal with waste and processes and so forth. It's, that's an incredibly powerful gift to have. Learn statistics. I think especially now with GPT, you got to be able to understand like, is the answer that it's giving actually right, or is it wrong? So learn logic, right? I mean, just maybe basic philosophy. Even I think I've been spending a lot of time studying language, actually, just understanding how that works. That's been fascinating, right? So
yeah, I mean, I can tell you, like I mentioned earlier, but my background. So I didn't get into data and analytics until I was 28.
Jeez,
29.
Late bloomer.
I know, right? I spent all that earlier time. I was doing theater, so I started a theater company in Chicago. I was writing play reviews. I was writing plays. I was directing shows. I was doing all that sort of stuff, and I only got out of it because I couldn't make any money.
Right.
At some point I realized one day I was going to, I had this data entry job, and I looked around the office, and it was like everyone had been there at least 10 years and they all hated one another.
Awesome.
And I realized I was going to be one of them unless I had a I got some skills and got a better day job. And anyway, the reason I tell that story is just those skills I learned in theater have been like invaluable to my
Mm,
career in data. They're just really like the ability to think about what motivates people, and how to talk to them and understand them where they are, and tell a story that will reach them where they are and motivate them in a certain direction. I mean, in data, of all the different things you could do if you're reporting up to a CIO somewhere, I think data is the place where those types of skills are by far the most useful. Um, and so I would embrace that sort of thing, right? Like that
yeah.
needs to be part of your education as a data analyst. Is like what does it mean? What how are you Who are you trying to reach, and how, and what's the best way to do it?
Mm,
You know.
that's really interesting. How would you go about teaching somebody that?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, first of all, you need to. The most important thing, honestly, in my mind, is like you need to be reading, um, and you can be and not just technical books. You can be, there are books that talk about these sorts of topics. I would say you need to be reading, but beyond just stuff related to your job. I mean, I think reading is
Yeah.
one of the most important things you can do as a human being, and I find, I read a lot of nonfiction or fiction rather, and literature and stuff like that, and or philosophy, and you're going to find that when you study great writers or great thinkers, that you are going to learn things about what it means to be a human being that you can apply to yourself, but you
Mm,
can also apply to your relationships to other people. I've been on this Roman Stoics kick lately, and like I learned stuff there all the time that I feel like applies to my work as a data practitioner.
interesting. Like what?
Um, a lot of it has to do with, like, to me, the biggest thing I would say that I pull out of it has to do with understanding what you can control and what you can't, and making sure that you invest in the things that you can control predominantly, and that your emotional attachments are only to those things that you can control, right?
Right.
So like, understanding, data you're working on a project of some sort, having an understanding of what the goal of this project is, and what is within your purview to advance that goal, and what is not. And being clear about that, I find very freeing, to allow me to focus and really narrow down on the things that are going to push the ball forward most effectively, while allowing me to let go of the frustrations of the things that I don't have control over.
Mm,
And I think it makes me more effective, right? Fundamentally, because I don't waste time. I like to think I
yeah.
don't waste time on things that ultimately I don't have influence over.
That's interesting. It's sort of like Stephen Covey's what was it, circle of concern and circle of influence or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of things you be concerned with to no end. But what can you really do about most of it? Probably nothing. That's the approach I take in a lot of cases too. I don't read a lot of news for that reason. It's like even if I knew something, like what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
It's nice to know, but at the end of the day, a lot of news too, I feel like it's fabricated to elicit certain emotions out of you, and
Sure.
so it's easy to sit there and doom scroll. Much like you, I read a ton of books. It's kind of all I do when I'm not writing these days. Is just sitting in my lounge chair, just reading. That's about it. So
Yeah. It's really. I mean, I just that's my career advice. That's also my life advice. Is like, read.
yeah,
You know. Um, you're here for a certain amount of time, and I find reading to be the most effective way to engage intellectually with the world. You need to go out and experience it too. Don't spend all your time sitting down reading, but you know, devote some time to it.
it helps. It's interesting too because reading's going. I feel like reading is just one of those activities that's declining in popularity.
Yeah.
I'd love to see some studies on this to see like, by how much. but it definitely feels like it is. So
It's so my the other super data brother Eric. Eric, shout out to Eric.
oh,
He
Eric.
so he and I read a lot of the same stuff, but the way we read it is different. I read
Mm.
it and he listens to the audiobook.
Oh, interesting.
And I find that is not that I don't listen to audiobooks, I do, but I prefer to read it. And he's 7 years younger than me, and he and all his friends exclusively listen to audiobooks. And I wouldn't think 7 years would be enough for that to be like a big cultural divide between us, but at least in our little group, it is.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I know people like that too. People older and also younger than me that just I guess listen to audiobooks. I'm not going to call it reading because I don't think these are the same thing.
They're not.
No, no, it's like watching TV and seeing you're reading a book. I'm like, no, you're literally not. But okay, but some people, I think they feel like it's more convenient to listen to an audiobook than to read. I have a Kindle that I read a lot on, and I have, I
Yeah.
mean, hundreds and probably thousands of books actually, if you include what's in my storage unit. It's just, it is what it is. I don't know. I mean, I grew up reading. I probably read like 1 to 2 books a week or more, and it's just kind of how it is. But and it's weird too with my kid, my 12-year-old, my oldest. He reads books. My youngest one, he just watches Minecraft, and the only thing he reads is like articles on how to be an influencer. Like that's he's like 9, and like that's literally what he reads. It's like how do I get to 100 million followers on YouTube? Like
That is I've seen stuff about I'm not going to remember any of the statistics. But about the number of young people who like that is their career aspiration is to be an influencer on a social media platform. It's like some huge percentage of young people. And it makes sense to me. Like they engage with the world so much through those platforms and through those influencers that, of course, that's what they're going to want to. In the same way that when I was 12, like I was certain I was going to be a rock star, even though I can't play an instrument.
right.
Like it makes sense to me that if you're 12 today, that is what you see as a really high status, high reward career path.
Oh, I mean,
My,
you could make good money at it if you succeeded at it. I mean,
yeah,
it's funny in the data space too, because I mean, you got friends that are like, almost a million, YouTube subscribers, and my kids look at that and it's like, oh, it's nothing.
yeah,
Mr. Beast is like 100 million followers. Who's this loser? So
yeah,
just like, yeah, but but it's influence is definitely one of these things that's very fractal in that sense, where you could be a kind of nerd famous in the data community, and but you step outside of that and nobody knows who you are, nobody cares. So
right.
yeah, so it's interesting for sure. So because yeah, like last night I was at a club just watching some friends play live techno. It's something I do once in a while too, but it's one of those things where it's refreshing in a way because I can go to these places and I don't have to talk about data with people.
Yeah.
So
Yes. I feel you on that one. I definitely, I mean, I'm passionate about data. I really, I love my career. I love the people I work with. But I definitely, there are times when I used to spend go back 15 years. I spent all my time talking about plays.
right.
And, there's, you can, it's easy to get too wrapped up in your day job, especially if you're a passionate, person who invests in whatever they're doing. And there are times when it's like, I would just like to talk about something else.
Hmm.
I feel you on that one for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Like at conferences, especially, like I'm always appreciative when somebody wants to talk about something besides data or tech.
Yeah.
Definitely appreciative of that we're given the opportunities to talk about these things, in our industry with other people. But it's also cool to talk about, reading or climbing or I don't know, beer or whatever. So yeah, It's interesting. Like, how often do you find yourself, I guess what's the ratio of the time you spend thinking about data versus the time that you spend not thinking about data?
Oh yeah. Um, it's it's probably lately been an unhealthy amount thinking about data compared to where I would like it to be. A lot of what I've been doing lately, kind of what we started talking about at the beginning. I have this. It just feels like we're at an inflection point in a lot of different ways in the data industry right now, and that's a kind of across roles. And so I really feel like in my particular area of expertise, which is the kind of the BI, DW reporting and analysis space, it's just things have felt really stale to me for a little while, and so
Mm,
I feel that I've kind of been a little more consumed than usual lately with like trying to figure out where should we go from here to make things better for everyone, but selfishly more exciting for myself.
right.
So I've been thinking about it, more than usual. I do. I mean, I do occasionally wake up in the middle of the night, like with a thought about, something data related that I can't get out of my head.
Ryan, you got to go see a therapist about this.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That happens. Those 3 a.m. thoughts, and then you write them down real quick, and then you read it in the morning, and you're like, "What the hell does this mean?"
That's funny. I don't know what's in the air, but I feel like I've been having very similar thoughts, and I know other people have too. It's sort of these existential thoughts about the industry, sort of where we are.
Yeah,
But I think it's kind of cool in a way though, because it's people like us that are, I think, helping shape the next version of the industry and pushing it forward. And that it's a good spot to be in versus just being on the receiving end of everything.
yeah,
I think we both reach a certain point where our words do carry some weight, and it helps drive the conversation forward, and it's a necessary conversation too. I look at the industry right now, and it feels like we're no better off really than I think we were probably you know 30, 40 years ago, in the sense where I feel like we haven't addressed really the elephant in the room, which is truly adding value, for example, right? Like that's
hmm
always something where on LinkedIn, for example, in our filter bubble, it's the questions are always there, like, oh, we need to add more business value and blah 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 blah. And it's like, I mean, if we got $1 for every one of those types of posts, we'd be quite well off. But it just seems like it's just a recurring theme over and over in the industry, and
yeah,
so
yeah. I every time I see, I always want to ask people like, what does that mean? And
yeah,
not in like I don't want to. I'm not trying to be rude about it, but like, there's so much conference. It's just like the catch-all. Oh, we just need to deliver more value, and it's like, well, can someone please define that for me in
hmm
a way that like we're all going to agree on, and um, you know, or we, can just define it at all, even if we don't all agree on it, right? Like, what does value mean? And is it reducible to show how data project X either saved $1 million or made $1 million? I think in a lot of cases it needs to be, or that at least needs to be a component of it, especially if we are heading into this recession that everybody thinks is coming but keeps not quite starting.
right,
At least not in a major way, it feels like. You're going to need to be able to show that at some point. It was interesting at Gartner. They had this two slides I saw where they what did they call them? It was financial metrics versus financial influencing metrics, and they were making the argument. So financial ones were like your classic, ROI, balance sheet, income statement type stuff, right? And then financial influencing were like value of the brand, value of company expertise, this more ephemeral stuff. And their argument was that as a data team, it's not enough just to show that classic financial ROI. You now need to be able to tie your data practice to the financial influencing ROI and show how your data practice helps enhance the value of the brand. And I thought that was interesting. But I think a lot of data teams, when we talk about value, like, let's not jump to how your data team influences the brand if you can't show how it contributes to the income statement.
Right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think it was a data monetization that's becoming something else people are talking a lot about now. Kind of related to the notion of getting more value. But one of the notions is, well, why can't data be on the balance sheet, for example,
Right.
and so forth. And so, I mean, my response to that is go talk to an accountant. I think they understand balance sheets better than data people do. So maybe understand how a balance sheet works and like why it looks the way it does.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it is really a shortcut to justification, right? That's the hope, right? Well, we can just get on the balance sheet, then I don't have to prove that this is
but it
valuable.
sort of already is, though, right? I mean, it's an intangible asset. It's classified under goodwill,
Yeah.
on your balance sheet. But yeah, because then the argument's, oh, you could, maybe depreciate the asset value over time and stuff. And it gets a bit convoluted. I think to your point, it's like, where's it on the income statement at the end of the day? Did you make a positive impact or did you not? And
Right.
I mean, to me, it's very, very black and white like that. So, but back in the day, that's kind of what you had to do, right? I mean, back in the day, when I started working in data over 20 years ago, it wasn't called data. It was just like, you get a job being a sales and marketing analyst and you're helping to provide lift for that particular function. And if you can do that, great. If you can't, then you should go find somewhere else to go work. So
Right.
data was kind of how you got there, but it's not like, we were the data department or anything. Um,
Yeah.
I kind of miss those days where it was just tied back to just an outcome. Didn't really give a shit how you got there. Just get there. So
Now, I'm curious, do you think that was it like the advent of the data scientist where things got like nebulous,
it
where it
feels like
was,
it. Yeah, I
yeah,
agree. Because it felt like around the early 2010s, data started becoming its own thing, I guess.
yeah,
Whereas before it was just sort of embedded as a function in whatever department you happen to be in. Now all of a sudden everyone wants to do data for its own sake. So I think it's definitely a big component of that. So data is a new oil. Data is the sexiest job of the 21st century. It's kind of like, then everyone wants to be a data scientist. That's kind of how it went. So, um,
yeah, yeah. Well, I think so too. Like that just kind of, that's where the shift happened. Like, hey, we just hired all these data scientists. We're paying them a ton of money. We don't know what they do, but it sure seems important.
right. It's sort of this prisoner's dilemma as well, where if you're a company and, you see your competitors
Yeah.
investing in data, I mean, your optimal solution is to also invest. You don't want to be left behind, even though you fast forward, several years and you realize, there wasn't, I don't want to poop with the whole thing, but it definitely
Mhm.
felt like it was getting ahead of itself, right? And I would argue that a lot of the end results, may have been I think a bit more eagerly anticipated than what actually happened. So
Yeah. I talked to someone at Gardner who told me that where they work, they did a study, they did an internal study to see what their competitors were spending on data, and
interesting.
they concluded that it was 3x what they were spending. So they basically overnight 3x the data budget with no idea what they were going to do with that money. And so they hired a ton of people, they bought all sorts of tech, and now this was a little while ago, so in the data lake, and what are we going to put in the data lake? We don't know. What's going to come out of it? We also don't know. Um, and then, like you said, you flash forward 3 years and it was like, what did we spend all that money on?
Oh yeah. Well, in other cases too, back in the day, kind of the mid 2010s and on, it wasn't uncommon for companies to hire data teams because that could, increase your valuation, for example, when you're looking to raise more money. It made it a lot more attractive. I know of one very popular company that does remote offices, kind of workspace stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They hoarded a bunch of data scientists there, and as far as I could tell, they were all mothballed. I don't know what they were working on. But it was just to say like, yeah, we're really investing in data science and AI.
Yeah.
We have this team of these, PhDs, and it was simply for the optics of being able to raise more money. Is why you had these people. It wasn't because if you look at the business model of that particular company, it's like, what would you hire a data science team for?
Right.
Like, what's the point? Like, you're
Yeah.
renting office space out to people. It's like not that hard. People have been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
So,
Right. What exactly is the machine optimization you're going to apply to this one?
yeah, but I saw this over and over, and even helped, kind of advise on pitch decks for some companies that were saying, "Oh, we're doing AI," and underneath the covers, that's non-existent, but you know, but everyone had this collective, desire to invest in this type of stuff, regardless, because I felt like it's again, there's a lot of fear of missing out,
Hmm.
and so if you're not doing it, then you're not data driven, quote unquote. So,
Data driven.
mhm, data driven. What does that mean to you?
Um, oh, that's a good one. I think ultimately, I definitely don't think a, a company or anything in life should be exclusively governed by what the math says. Um, because the math will tell you to do things, you know, it's impossible to know what's going to happen in the future. And sometimes you just need to make a bet, right?
Mm,
And so, and that will often get you your biggest failure or your biggest reward. And so, in my mind, a data driven company or even person is someone who uh, takes the, is someone who uses the data, uses the numbers to make an informed decision, knowing whether or not like you have to have the data to choose whether or not you're going to accept or reject it, right? I don't think it means just accepting whatever the numbers tell you, but having an accurate view of what the numbers are and then applying your own wisdom on top of it.
yeah.
And if you're not going to do what the numbers say, being able to articulate why.
Mm, I like that. I like that a lot. How many companies out there do you think are data driven?
Sorry, could you
Oh,
repeat that?
sorry. Like how many companies out there that you've
Oh.
seen do you think are actually data driven?
Well, I think a lot of them fall into one of two buckets. The one bucket, the biggest bucket by far, is we don't have a handle on what the data even is, and so we're not able to use it to inform decision making in a timely manner. I would say to this day that is still most companies, especially as you get further and further away from kind of the tech firms and the tech adjacent firms, right? You get out here. I'm in the Detroit area. You go to some mid-sized auto parts manufacturer here, and like that's not how they're making decisions in a lot of ways, right? They don't have a fundamental grasp of the data.
Right.
So I'd say most companies fall into that bucket. The other bucket is, we've decided we're going to do whatever the numbers say. That's a smaller slice, but larger than the third slice, which is, we have a grasp of the data. We know what the numbers say. We understand what from a pure data perspective, what it's telling us to do. And we have the wisdom to reject that when that makes the most sense for us. That's the smallest slice. And that's where I think everybody should strive to be, both organizations and human beings.
That's a really good one. I like that. Cool. Kind of switching gears. Like, I guess what's next for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, one thing, we're continuing. My brother and I are continuing on the SuperDataBros train. So, we do our show every Thursday. It's live streamed to LinkedIn and YouTube
Nice.
at the same time every Thursday at noon Eastern. And so we'll keep doing that. And then, we're 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 trying to figure out. It's just very interesting. Um, working in that space. That's my favorite thing is like getting to meet people like you and people who I
Yeah,
interview on the
likewise.
show.
Hmm.
Is awesome. And these conversations that we have are great. So that's like the thing I'm most excited about going forward. And then, I mean, the thing I'm really working on is like just how how do I and how do we as kind of BI people, transition to whatever is going to replace this dashboard era?
Hmm.
And what can I do to steer that to the healthiest place possible for all of us as people, right? That's my primary goal. And so, whatever the best way to do that as someone who hosts a show, as someone who has these conversations, and then, professionally, the projects I take on, that's what I care about the most.
That's awesome. Yeah, you're doing the Lord's work. I really like your show. Your Substack is awesome. It's killing it. Just really, really thoughtful content, and the fact that you're a writer, I think, shows because your writing's really good too. So,
Thank you.
yeah. So now their ego is like the size of the sun. It's like, yes, Joe, keep talking. So, no, this has been good, man. For people who want to learn more about you, how can they do that?
The easiest way to do it, so connect with me on LinkedIn, right? It's Ryan Dolley, Dolley. I think I might be the only one. And then check out the Super Data Brothers YouTube channel, youtube.com/C/Super Data Brothers. And we've been working on a website for, I just tell you superdataBrothers.com, but like if you go there right now, you're not going to see anything. We've been working on that forever. It's still not done. But yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, check out the YouTube channel. And yeah, those are the ways right
Awesome.
now.
Very good. Very good. I'll put the links in the show notes so people can check those out. Awesome. Well, it's great having you on the show. Welcome to come back anytime, have a chat. So, yeah, it's been fun. So,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thank you.
Great conversation, man.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right. See you.